The first time Quinn pressed something cold against the back of my neck, I was sitting at my desk trying to calculate load tolerances for a parking structure in Franklin, and the sound I made was not one I am proud of. "You're welcome," she said. It was a LaCroix can, lime-flavored, straight from the bottom shelf of the freezer, where she'd been keeping her emergency cold reserves since our central air stopped working on the 3rd of July. Nashville in summer without AC is not a philosophical experience. It is a survival test. I had already rearranged my work schedule to avoid being in the apartment between noon and 4, when the upstairs neighbor's footsteps seemed to make the whole building hotter just by existing. "That was not a thank you sound," I said. Quinn set the can on the desk beside my keyboard and leaned against the doorframe with the particular expression she wore when she'd already decided she was right about something and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. "You looked like you were developing a stress fracture. I was being preventative. You could have handed it to me. Could have, didn't." That was the problem with Quinn Mercer. She made choices very deliberately, and then acted like they were obvious. She had moved into the second bedroom 8 months earlier after my former roommate got a job offer in Denver and left with 3 days' notice and a very sincere apology. Quinn found my listing on Craigslist and responded with a single question before I'd even posted photos of the bathroom. "Do you have strong opinions about dish drying racks?" I told her the jury was still out. She said that was the right answer and asked when she could see the place. She showed up on a Saturday with a hatchback so full of vinyl records, I couldn't see the back seats. She apologized for none of it. The records went on a shelf in her room, alongside a drawing tablet, 3 kinds of ink, and a fiddle leaf fig named Howard that she talked to on particularly bad work days. Quinn was 26 and worked as a graphic designer for a branding agency downtown, doing logos and packaging and what she described as making companies look like they have a personality, whether or not that's true. She was very good at it. I knew this because within 2 weeks of moving in, she had rearranged the layout of our shared wall space in a way that made the apartment feel 3 times bigger without buying a single new thing. Living with Quinn was easy in the ways that make you stupid. She made a full pot of coffee every morning, even though she only drank 1 cup, because she'd figured out. I went through 2.5. I kept the shelf above the stove clear because she was 5'4" and needed the lower space to actually reach things. We watched bad true crime documentaries on Tuesday nights and argued about motive. She knew I went quiet for about 10 minutes after a difficult call with a client and learned not to talk to me during that window. I knew she stress cleaned when a deadline was close and that the correct response was to stay out of the kitchen and leave her alone with the countertops. We weren't dating. We had never come close to dating, technically. But by the 4th day of no AC, I had started doing a lot of things that didn't technically count as anything. The 4th night was a Wednesday. I was still at my desk at 9:30, the ceiling fan doing its best and failing, when I heard Quinn's door open. She came in wearing shorts and a tank top with the straps pushed off her shoulders to maximize air contact with her skin, carrying the ice pack from the freezer in one hand and a glass of water in the other. She set the glass beside the LaCroix can from 3 days ago that I still hadn't thrown away for no reason I wanted to examine. Then she stepped around behind my chair and pressed the ice pack flat against the back of my neck. I went completely still. "Stop working," she said. "It's not a structural emergency. It's a parking structure. Someone's going to park in it. Tomorrow. They'll park in it tomorrow." Her hand was still holding the ice pack against my skin. The cold had spread down between my shoulder blades, and I was not going to move, and I had enough self-awareness to acknowledge, at least internally, that this had stopped being about the heat approximately 30 seconds ago. "Quinn. You can let go now." I could. She didn't. There's a specific kind of silence that only happens when you're very aware of exactly where another person is standing. This was that kind. I turned my chair around, which meant she had to step back, which meant I was now looking up at her in the dim light of my desk lamp. "You're staring at me," she said. "You're holding an ice pack against my neck in my own home. Those things can both be true." I laughed and it came out rougher than I meant it to. Something moved across her face. I had an impulse to ask a question I was not ready to have answered, so I reached past her and picked up the water glass. "Sit down," I said. "I'll close out the file." She pulled my desk chair into the middle of the room and sat cross-legged in it while I saved everything and shut the laptop. I sat on the floor with my back against the desk. This was not a normal arrangement. Neither of us mentioned that. "Howard's drooping," she said. "It's 94 degrees in there. Howard's protesting. Howard has opinions. Howard is a plant. Don't say that where he can hear you." Her phone buzzed on the desk. She reached for it without looking, and the screen lit up before she could get there. I didn't mean to read it. The text was from someone named Lena, and it said, "Did you tell him about Seattle yet? Or are you just going to move and hope he figures it out?" Quinn grabbed the phone. She held it screen down against her palm and looked at me with the expression of someone who had just watched a car roll slowly into a ditch. "Tell me what about Seattle?" I said. She set the phone on her knee. For a moment she was very still, which was not Quinn's usual setting. Quinn moved constantly, fidgeted with pens, tapped her thumbnail against her teeth when she was thinking, rearranged things on surfaces without noticing she was doing it. Still meant something was wrong. "I got a job offer," she said, 2 months ago. "In Seattle. A design studio there. Good one. They do editorial, environmental graphics, some museum work." She looked at her hands. "I've been trying to decide." 2 months. "I know. You've known for 2 months, and you didn't say anything." She looked up. "Every time I thought about telling you, I'd look at you, and I'd realize I was checking your face for a reason to stay." She said it like she'd rehearsed it and had decided honesty was less embarrassing than whatever the alternative was. That didn't seem like a fair reason to turn down a good job. I sat with that for a long moment. "Are you going to take it?" "I haven't said yes yet." "But you haven't said no." She shook her head. Outside, a car passed on the street below with its windows down, and some song I didn't recognize trailing behind it. The fan moved air that was still too warm. I was thinking about the fact that I knew which grocery store she preferred, and that I'd been to 3 different ones to find the specific brand of crackers she liked. And that last Tuesday, when she'd gotten off a call with a difficult client, I'd left a bowl of mac and cheese outside her door without being asked, and that none of those things added up to a number I'd been willing to do anything with. "I've been careful with you," I said. "I want you to know I know that." She looked at me. "I had a relationship end badly a couple years back. My ex said I was emotionally unavailable, and she wasn't wrong. I've been deliberate since then about not building something I wasn't ready to finish." "I know," Quinn said quietly. "I've watched you be careful." That landed differently than I expected, like an acknowledgement of something we'd both been doing without ever naming it. "She moved out?" Quinn asked. I moved out. It was her apartment. I looked at the ceiling fan. Took the better part of a year to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop in every room I walked into. She nodded slowly. I was not sure what I was trying to tell her. I had started the sentence knowing what I meant and ended it somewhere sideways. "Quinn. Yeah. If I ask you something, will you answer it straight?" She met my eyes. Probably. Was any of this? I gestured at the ice pack still in her hand, at the space between us, at the last 8 months generally. Was any of it about the job? Like, figuring out whether you wanted to stay? She was quiet long enough that the answer clarified itself. "Some of it," she said finally. "At first, then it stopped being a calculation." The AC repair crew showed up at 10:15, which was either incredible timing or the universe having a sense of humor. They were in the unit for 40 minutes. Quinn and I sat in the hallway on opposite sides of the thermostat panel and talked about nothing in particular. A podcast she'd been listening to, a bridge consultation I'd been brought in on. And when the crew left and the vents finally pushed cool air again, something that had been suspended very carefully in the room came down without quite landing. We went to bed on separate sides of the apartment, like usual. A week later, I came home from work and found a lease termination notice on the kitchen counter. I stood looking at it for a while. I heard Quinn's key in the front door. I was still holding the notice when she walked in. She saw it in my hand. She set her bag down. I said yes, she said. I figured. I wanted to tell you before you found the paperwork. She pulled out a kitchen chair and sat in it backwards, arms folded over the top. I'm sorry you found it first. When? End of the month. She looked at her hands. I've already got a sublet lined up in Capitol Hill. It's a studio. It's small, but it has good light. I set the notice back on the counter. Why? She looked up. You said some of it stopped being a calculation, so why are you going? Quinn was quiet for a moment. When she answered, it was careful. Because I've been coming home every day for 8 months to the person I wanted. You'd be in the kitchen, or you'd come out and ask about my day, and you'd sit close enough that I could feel the warmth off you, and then you'd go back to your side of the apartment. She paused. I can't keep doing that and call it a roommate situation. It's not honest. You could have told me. I tried to check your face for permission and couldn't read it, so she held both hands out, palms up. Seattle. I pulled out the other chair and sat across from her. I'm not good at this. I know. That's not an excuse. I just want you to understand I was doing something wrong and didn't have the language for it while I was doing it. She watched me. I know which mug you always reach for, I said, the blue one with the chip in the handle. I know you hum when you're focused even though you think you don't. I know you sleep with the window cracked even in winter and that Howard droops when you're stressed before you're stressed enough to notice yourself. I stopped. I have been paying attention to you in a way that is not strictly roommate behavior. I just kept telling myself it didn't count because I hadn't done anything about it. Quinn's expression had gone very still, not the careful kind, a different kind. Why are you telling me this now? She said. Because you're leaving, and I should have said something once, before, that was relevant. That's a terrible reason. I know, I had better ones earlier. I kept calling my fear wisdom and waiting for it to become true. She looked at the notice on the counter, then back at me. I'm still going, she said. I can't not go. I said yes. And I want this job and I need to find out what it feels like to be somewhere new on my own terms. I'm not asking you to stay. Then, what are you asking? I didn't have a clean answer for that. I told her I didn't know. She said that was probably honest. She made us both tea, which was a Quinn move. When the emotional register got too high, she made tea and let it go cold, and then complained about the tea. We sat at the kitchen table for another hour talking about logistics and nothing. And eventually, she went to bed, and I sat there with the 2 mugs going lukewarm and the termination notice, and thought about how many months I had spent being careful and what exactly I had protected. She moved out on a Saturday at the end of July. Her friend Lena arrived with a rented cargo van and the focused efficiency of someone who had done this before and had opinions. Lena was taller than Quinn, louder, and shook my hand with the grip of a person who had been following the situation from a distance and was reserving judgment. You're the roommate, she said. I am. Quinn mentions you constantly. Quinn appeared from the bedroom carrying a lamp. Lena, boxes. I'm gathering context. I spent 6 hours carrying Quinn's life down 3 flights of stairs. Every box that came out of her room made it less recognizable. By late afternoon, the walls were bare, and the closet was empty, and Howard was wrapped in a dish towel in the back of the van. Quinn stood in the doorway of her old room and looked at it for a moment without saying anything. She handed me her key when it was time to go. When I told her to keep it, she closed her fingers around it and looked at me with an expression I didn't have a word for yet. She kissed my cheek before she got in the van. I stood on the sidewalk and watched them pull out and did not go back upstairs for a long time. Inside, her room was empty. On the floor where the drafting table had been, there was a flat package wrapped in brown paper with my name written across it in her handwriting. I sat down on the floor and opened it. It was a print she'd made, a clean-lined illustration of our kitchen, the box fan in the corner, the ice pack on the counter, me in the desk chair turned sideways looking at her sitting cross-legged in my chair, looking back. She had written along the bottom in small even type. The apartment was never the point. I turned it over. A note was taped to the back. Alec, don't say it because the room is empty. Say it when you know. Q. I read it twice. Then I looked at the illustration for a long time. The way she'd drawn the light between us. Not the desk lamp or the ceiling fixture, but something she'd invented. Something warmer and less explainable. I pulled out my phone. Are you home? 3 dots appeared immediately. I just got here. I'm standing in a room of boxes. I'm coming up. It's a 9-hour drive, Alec. I know. I booked a flight to Seattle before I stood up off the floor. It left the next morning at 6:45 and cost me $260 more than it should have because I was buying it at 9 p.m. on a Saturday. I paid without looking at the total because I am not always a financially rational person when I've made up my mind about something, and I had made up my mind. It rained in Seattle. This was apparently not news to anyone who lived there. I had packed for Nashville weather and stood outside Quinn's building in Capitol Hill, looking like someone who had made a series of choices and was not fully prepared to defend all of them, holding 2 cups of coffee from the Seattle equivalent of the place she went every Sunday morning back home, a detail I had found on my phone, somewhere over Oregon, and acted on without fully examining why. She opened the door in leggings and an oversized flannel and looked at me for a full 3 seconds. You said you had a work thing nearby, she said. I lied. You flew to Seattle. Yes. She looked at the coffee cups, then at my wet hair, then back at my face, because I held out one of the cups. My hands are freezing. She stared at me. I drove here with the windows down, I added, because it had sounded better when I rehearsed it over the Rockies. Quinn took the cup. Her eyes were doing something complicated. You flew here because your hands are cold. And because I'm in love with you. I said it straight, no ceremony, mostly the second one. The hands were a secondary concern. She didn't say anything. A woman walked past us on the sidewalk with a dog and glanced at us, the way Pacific Northwesterners looked at people having significant moments in the rain, which was briefly and without investment. Quinn stepped back from the door. Come inside. You're soaked. The studio was small and still mostly boxes. Howard was on the windowsill, already orienting toward the light. I set my coffee on the only clear surface, while Quinn found a dish towel for my hair. You rehearsed that, she said, handing it over. The hands are freezing part. The rest I put together on the way from the airport. That's somewhat alarming. I meant every word of it. She stood with both hands wrapped around her cup and looked at me with an expression I could, for once, read clearly. I've been in love with you since February, she said. The Tuesday your client cut your project budget by 40%, and you sat at the kitchen table for an hour not speaking, and I brought you leftover soup, and you looked up at me like I had done something extraordinary. She stopped. That was when it became a problem. You should have said something. You were so careful. I was wrong to be. She set the coffee down. I crossed the few feet of clear floor between us. Up close, she smelled like the same vanilla hand lotion she'd kept beside the sink back home, and her eyes were bright in a way that meant the next thing she said was going to undo me completely. I took this job partly to see if I could want something that had nothing to do with you, she said. I've been here 3 weeks. I designed a full brand identity for a coffee roaster. I went to 3 museums. I made friends with a woman in 4B who has extremely strong opinions about sourdough starter. And every time something good happened, my first instinct was to text you. I put my hands on her face. Her skin was warm. She tilted her head into my palm. I should have said something in Nashville, I told her, before any of this. Probably, she looked up, but you're here now. I'm here now. She kissed me before I could overthink the geometry of it. Her hands caught the front of my jacket. I steadied her at the waist, and the entire careful, deliberate structure I had been building for 2 years rearranged itself around something better. The kiss was brief and certain, and then she pulled back and looked at me like she needed to confirm it had been real. You flew here, she said. I would have driven if it were closer. That's not romantic. That's logistics. I'm a structural engineer. Logistics is how I say I love you. She kissed me again. This time it wasn't brief. Outside, rain came down with the confidence of a city that had been doing this for centuries and had no intention of apologizing. I pulled her closer. She made a small sound against my mouth that I had spent 8 months trying not to imagine and had failed at completely. When we finally came apart, her forehead rested against my chin. "You're staying the weekend," she said. It was not a question. "I have a return flight Monday morning." "Cancel it." "I have meetings on Monday." "Reschedule them." I kissed her temple. "I can do Tuesday." She pulled back enough to look at me. "I'm not moving back to Nashville." "I know. I like it here. I like my job. I like my sourdough neighbor." "I know. So we figure it out." "We figure it out," I said. She looked at me carefully, checking for the fear. It was there. I felt it the way you feel the edge of a roof when you're working on one, present and real, not something to dismiss, but not something that meant stop. "I'm going to mess something up eventually," I said. "I'm not naturally good at this. I'll be infuriatingly logical about things that aren't logical. And I'll rearrange your kitchen without asking. Howard gets the south-facing window in whatever place we end up, and I'm told that is non-negotiable." "Howard," she said gravely, "has requirements. Howard is a plant." She gasped. I caught her before she could step back, and she dissolved into laughter against my chest. And I stood in her new city, in her new apartment, holding her, while Howard sat on the windowsill looking appropriately smug about the whole situation. We ordered Thai food from a place 2 blocks away and ate it on the floor surrounded by boxes, because neither of us had located where she'd packed the table. Quinn sat between my legs with her back against my chest while Rain tapped her new window. She showed me the coffee roaster brand on her laptop. I told her about the bridge consultation I'd been brought in on, and she asked every technical question, wrong, but with so much genuine interest, it didn't matter. "Do you regret taking the job?" I asked at some point. She thought about it seriously, which was one of the things I loved about her. She didn't answer questions like that on instinct. "No," she said. "I needed to do something that was entirely mine." She tilted her head back to look at me. "And you needed to let me do it." "I didn't exactly let you willingly. You flew here. After the fact." "That still counts as choosing," she said. "That's the part that matters. We figured it out. This part is less dramatic than the rest, but it is also the part that turned out to mean the most. I had a project in Portland that fall and stretched the timeline by 3 weeks. She came back to Nashville for Thanksgiving and stayed 9 days. In January, she found out her agency had a remote arrangement her manager had been sitting on, and by spring, she had cleared enough independence to split her time between cities. By the following summer, we had signed a lease on a place in East Nashville, with a south-facing window for Howard and a kitchen wide enough for 2 people to occupy at the same time without negotiating right of way. On the first morning in our kitchen, I was standing at the counter with my coffee, looking out at a yard that was technically ours now, when I heard Quinn come out of the bedroom behind me. I heard her open the freezer drawer. I knew exactly what she had taken out of it. She pressed an ice-cold can against the back of my neck. I didn't flinch. I reached up and covered her hand with mine. "You're not even surprised," she said. "I've been waiting for it." That's a terrible way to live. I turned around. She was still holding the can, and she had the expression she wore when she'd already decided something and was simply waiting for the world to arrive. I took the can out of her hand and set it on the counter. "It's my favorite way," I said. Howard, on the windowsill, had no further comment.